Okay, hey everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Bitter Pill. Uh, well, it looks like my virtual background isn't working for some reason. Not that it works that well without a green screen. But anyway, so tonight I wanted to talk about the 1 year anniversary of the October 7th uprising. And I realize it's been, 10 days now since that took place, but I've been busy and I really wanted to do something. So uh, thought I'd go ahead and do that. And first of all, let's take a look at some reactions from various politicians to the 1 year anniversary of October 7th. And then we will talk about what we now know, despite Israel's refusal to allow for an independent investigation and its efforts to get rid of evidence, such as burying cars that clearly were hit by uh, Israeli heavy weaponry and not by anything that you know Hamas or the other Palestinian groups were carrying, or at the very least, there were too many um, vehicles and houses and so forth damaged beyond belief to really think it was plausible that the damage came from the sort of weaponry that Palestinians had available, rocket propelled grenades and, machine guns and that sort of thing. So, anyway, without further ado, let me show you a few things. Okay, well, got to start with Tulsi Gabbard, who, at one point in time was, and it's not saying very much, but she was the best on offer in a really terrible party, the Democratic Party, because she did take decent stances on most foreign policy issues, had good environmental policy, proposed a climate change bill and all that, supported universal health care, etc. I didn't vote for her in 2020. The primaries, so there wasn't any point anyway. But she was the best of a bad bunch, I guess. But now, she's just a fucking Republican. 100% Zionist views. There's still some things I agree with her on. She's still solidly against the Ukraine war, which, of course, all her former Democratic colleagues are 100% for. But anyway, here's what she had to say about the 1 year anniversary of the October 7th uprising. Hamas's horrific attack against Israel 1 year ago today that took the lives of approximately 1,200 Israelis at a music concert and in their homes is a stark reminder of the ongoing short and long-term threat of Islamist terrorism that continues to spread around the world today. Their goal is to establish a global Islamist caliphate where all must live under their Sharia law. Many leaders in the West have promised to defeat this threat and fail because they refuse to acknowledge that it must be defeated ideologically and militarily. Kamala Harris refuses to utter the words radical Islamist terrorism because she's afraid of her supporters labeling her an Islamophobe. Her open border policies have invited Islamist terrorists into our country unchecked. She cannot be trusted to defeat this threat, defend our freedom, and keep the American people safe. Um, so, so she basically, her point of view is indistinguishable from, you know, Donald Trump's or, for that matter, Kamala Harris's or Joe Biden's. Um, There were officially, according to Israeli statistics, and they identified all the people who were killed, 1,139 Israeli killed on October 7th. So I guess she wasn't too far off on that. But in a nutshell, many of the Israelis who were killed on October 7th were not killed by Hamas. A lot of them were killed by Israel through, just not only crossfire, but the Hannibal Directive was implemented, meaning they were trying to deliberately kill both Palestinians who captured Israelis and those captive Israelis themselves. Israel's policy for a while there, since they had some cases where Hamas was able to exchange a small number of Israeli soldiers that they were holding prisoner of war for a very large number of Palestinians being illegally, in most cases, held in Israeli prisons and often tortured and so forth. So Israel decided they weren't going to do that anymore. I guess they have done this before, but then they stopped for a while, and then Hamas was able to arrange a prisoner exchange about 10 to 15 years ago. I forget the exact date, where they traded one Israeli soldier held captive for something like 1,000 Palestinian prisoners. And so Israel decided they just weren't going to let Palestinians take Israelis prisoner in order to have bargaining chips to trade for Palestinians that they were taking prisoner by simply killing as many the Israeli hostages or prisoners of war as they could. In addition, so we don't know how many Israelis were killed by the IDF, the Israeli army itself, but I would guess it was several hundred, given the enormous amount of firepower they unleashed on October 7th, and the fact that it was their goal, as they later admitted, to kill Israelis rather than let them be taken back to Gaza and used as a bargaining chip to secure the release of Palestinians held hostage or prisoner or whatever you want to call it. And over 300 of those 1,139 people, Israelis who were killed on October 7th, were in the military, active duty military. Several hundred more were in the reserves, and I would imagine many of them were armed. The kibbutzim, the settlements that is surrounding Gaza, were basically like little forts. They were part of the security apparatus, basically imprisoning Palestinians in Gaza. Israel wouldn't let them leave without special permission, like if they had a medical need to leave Gaza. They were at the whim of the Israeli government, sometimes allowed to go out for medical treatment, stuff like that. But in general, uh, they were not allowed to leave. And what was allowed to come into Gaza was very, very limited. They basically tried to make Palestinians in Gaza go hungry as punishment for their resisting Israel to such an extent that Israel uh, had to uh, withdraw its troops from Gaza back in the, I believe it was 2006. And so they took revenge on Palestinian civilians for that by putting them on a diet, as some Israeli official or another put it. Um, so anyway, the purpose of the October 7th uprising was to rebel against that state of siege that Israel had imposed on Gaza, as well as you know all the other atrocities Israel was committing. The apartheid, the ethnic cleansing, constant expansion of illegal settlements, torture of prisoners and holding prisoners without charge, thousands of them, and constantly attacking Al-Aqsa Mosque in Jerusalem. So anyway, um, in typical, uh, racist Western fashion, Tulsi calls Hamas terrorists, even though, although certainly it's possible, if not likely, that there were a few Palestinians who, uh, harmed civilians, injured or killed civilians deliberately on October 7th. That was not the plan. The plan was, you know, an uprising to like attack the military encirclement of Gaza, which they pulled off pretty successfully. They really did a number on the troops that were surrounding Gaza and their communications infrastructure and so on and so forth. Um, their goal, she says, is to establish a global Islamist caliphate where all must live under their Sharia law. God, no, it isn't. Yet another racist, Islamophobic claim here, where basically, you know, her viewpoint is that all Muslims are alike. Um, if the Taliban or Al Qaeda or ISIS or whoever, who Tulsi has rightly opposed in the past, um, if they want to establish an Islamist caliphate, a Muslim fundamentalist dictatorship, in other words, then according to Tulsi, that must be the goal of every armed group of Muslims in the world. That's just ridiculous. And by the way, out of those 1,139 Israelis who uh, died on October 7th, about 40 of them were children. So it seems pretty clear that there were a lot of young couples and single people uh, without kids there in the settlements around Gaza who were there in order to uh, aid in the encirclement, the according to international law occupation of Gaza. That's why they were there, and that's why they were attacked on October 7th. And of course, you knew Kamala Harris was going to say something equally stupid about October 7th. She said, I'll never forget the horror of October 7th, 2023, when Hamas terrorists brutally attacked Israel. Read my full statement. I don't know. What do you think? Should we read her full statement? Okay, Kamala. Um, uh, I will never forget the horror of October 7th. 1,200 innocent people, including 46 Americans, were massacred by Hamas terrorists. Okay, so first lie right there. Uh, in the neighborhood of 1,200 people died on that day. Uh, most of them were not innocent people massacred by Hamas terrorists. Hundreds of them were members of the military, and others were civilians or reservists. Who were there to participate in the security apparatus, basically imprisoning people in Gaza. And we already mentioned, a lot of those 1,139 Israelis were actually killed by Israel. Women raped on the side of the road. She loves repeating that, evidence-free claim. She's never talked about the numerous claims by Palestinians, not just women, but men and children as well, who say they were raped in Israeli prisons. It's a very widespread practice, apparently, according to, the alleged victims themselves. And on the other hand, so far there have been no women coming forward saying that they were raped by Hamas or other Palestinians on October 7th. No Israeli women have said that. It was the deadliest day for the Jewish people since the Holocaust. What that Hamas did that day was pure evil. It was brutal and sickening. It has rekindled a deep fear among the Jewish people, not just in Israel, but in the United States and around the world. So, Hamas is under your bed, American Jews. They're going to get you. The long, extraordinary arc of Jewish history is full of pogroms and prejudice, slaughter, and separation. And now, in our own generation, there's another moment that the world must never forget. I am devastated by the loss and pain of the Israeli people as a result of the heinous October 7th attack. Doug and I, my Zionist babysitter and I, pray for the families of the victims and hope they find solace in remembering the lives their loved ones lived. We also pray for the safety of Jewish people all around the world. We must ensure nothing like the horrors of October 7th ever happen again. I will do everything in my power to ensure that the threat Hamas poses is eliminated, that it is never again able to govern Gaza, that it fails in its mission to annihilate Israel, and that the people of Gaza are free from the grip of Hamas. I will never stop fighting for the release of all the hostages, including the 7 American citizens living and deceased still held. I will never stop fighting for justice for those who murdered Hirsch Goldberg, Poland, and other Americans, and I will always ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself against Iran and Iran-backed terrorists like Hamas. My commitment to the security of Israel is unwavering. So no mention of, any Palestinians killed either before October 7th or at least on this page of the statement since October 7th. No sympathy expressed for their families. And, obviously no recognition that, Palestinians have a legitimate gripe with Israel. I will always ensure Israel has what it needs to defend itself. So, obviously, there is no intention whatsoever on her part to pressure Israel to enact a ceasefire and hostage exchange. No mention of all the thousands of Palestinians being held by Israel. She does finally on page 2 acknowledge that Palestinians have been killed since October 7th. Hamas's terrorist attack on October 7th launched a war in Gaza. So it's Hamas's fault that Israel decided to massacre tens of thousands of civilians. So she acknowledges tens of thousands of lives lost, children fleeing for safety over and over again, mothers and fathers struggling to obtain food, water, and medicine. Gosh, Kamala, why were they struggling to obtain food, water, and medicine? What could have been the cause of that? Was it just, an accident or a natural disaster or crop failure? What is it? Couldn't be that the Israeli government deliberately kept those things out now, could it? She says, it is far past time for a hostage and ceasefire deal to end the suffering of innocent people. But I'm going to make sure that Israel has all the weapons it wants so they can ignore any pleas for a ceasefire and just keep on slaughtering Palestinians. And I will always fight for the Palestinian people to be able to realize their right to dignity, freedom, security, and self-determination. Oh, bullshit. We also continue to believe that a diplomatic solution across the Israel-Lebanon border region is the only path to restore lasting calm and allow residents on both sides to return safely to their homes. You're blaming Israel's constant encroachments into Lebanon and their massacres of civilians over and over. You're blaming that on Hezbollah. You're not acknowledging that Israel is the aggressor here, and you want us to believe that you have any interest whatsoever in a diplomatic solution as you shovel weapons to Israel so that they can continue attacking Lebanon, attacking Syria, perhaps attacking Iran, attacking Yemen, and of course attacking Palestinians, not just in Gaza, but in the West Bank too. Today, as we mourn the lives lost on October 7th, no mention of October 6th or October 8th or anything else, I know many Jews will be reciting and reflecting on the Jewish prayer for mourning, the Kaddish. The words of the Kaddish, however, are not about death. Okay, I don't even know what that is. But, All right, enough of that bullshit. Zay Scrolls there were no rapes on October 7th as confirmed by Haaretz and others, citing Israeli officials themselves. But actual mass systematic pedophilic rape of babies, children, girls, boys, women, and men by your precious Israelis has been confirmed and documented. Okay, so little excerpt here from Haaretz, which is basically the Israeli equivalent of the New York Times. They say, however, at Shura base, to which most of the bodies were taken for purposes of identification, there were 5 forensic pathologists at work. In that capacity, they also examined bodies that arrived completely or partially naked in order to examine the possibility of rape. According to a source knowledgeable about the details, there were no signs on any of these bodies attesting to sexual relations having taken place or of mutilation of genitalia. These teams, I'm going to just read the highlighted parts here, did not document a single case of sexual assault or cases of genital mutilation. Beyond this, from inquiries put to 3 bodies in the defense establishment by Haaretz, it emerges that the intelligence material collected by the police and the intelligence bodies, including footage from terrorist body cameras, remember it's Haaretz, so they're going to say that, does not contain visual documentation of any acts of rape themselves. So even though, of course, they label anybody fighting on the Palestinian side as terrorists automatically, regardless of uh, their actions, and never label their own troops that way, regardless of how many civilians they deliberately kill. Um, Despite their biases, they're willing to acknowledge that there's no evidence of rape. But Kamala Harris, on the other hand, is constantly repeating this talking point as if it's a fact that Israeli women were raped by Palestinians on October 7th. And it just is not. There just has still not been any evidence of this. Okay, may as well throw a Congress person in here. Peter Barca, I haven't heard of him, but he's a member of Congress from Wisconsin, a Democrat. And, as I'm sure there's basically no difference between the vast majority of Democrats and the majority of Republicans on their views of Israel and Palestine. They're all pro-Israel, almost all of them. A few exceptions like Rashida Tlaib. So Peter Barca says, it has been a year since the horrific and devastating terrorist attacks committed against Israel on 10/7, and our hearts still ache for the innocent lives we lost that day. We must secure the release of the remaining hostages and bring a peaceful resolution to this conflict. So my response to that was, I know that in your racist mind, an armed uprising in which civilians were killed is a terrorist attack, quote unquote, if it was carried out by brown people. But the reality is that 10/7 was a rebellion against military occupation and apartheid, and 10/8 onward has been an Israeli genocide. Actually, Israel bombed Gaza on October 7th, too. I had forgotten that till I was reviewing some stuff the other day. So the genocide really started on October 7th. And here are all kinds of other politicians that have said dumb shit. Here's German Foreign Minister Annalena Baerbock, spewing her nonsense about it. So she says, God, what the hell is going on here? Self-defense, of course, means not only attacking terrorists, but destroying them. That is why I've made it so clear when Hamas terrorists hide behind people, behind schools, then we get into very difficult issues, but we won't shy away. That's why I made it clear to the UN that civilian places can also lose their protected status because terrorists abuse it. That's what Germany stands for, and that's what Israel's security means for us. Okay, she didn't directly talk about October 7th in this particular clip, but basically, she's saying it's fine and dandy for Israel to kill civilians because Israel says that Hamas is using hospitals and schools and so forth as military bases. And that if that happens, if there's any Palestinian fighters in a hospital, that means that the civilians there, the patients and the doctors and the nurses, are fair game for Israel to murder. According to Annalena Baerbock, who, by the way, is supposedly a Green Party member, and the Green Party supposedly stands for peace or nonviolence, but don't tell that to German Greens, because they have been warmongers since at least the Iraq War, if not before. But yeah, her claim is just nonsensical. Just because there are, according to Israel, who of course lie all the time, Palestinian fighters in or under this or that hospital or school or refugee camp or whatever it is, that doesn't make it a legitimate target. The only way in which it's legal under international law to attack what would ordinarily be considered a civilian structure, like a school or hospital, is if it is primarily being used for the purpose of being a military facility. If it's predominantly used for civilian purposes, you cannot attack it under any circumstances under international law. So she's just completely full of crap here, as German politicians tend to be. Okay. Well, what do we know about what really happened on October 7th? Ali Al-Baniba said on the October 7th anniversary, more than a year later, new revelations are still coming out about how Israel slaughtered its own people on 7th of October. So according to Ynet, which is an Israeli source, policemen shot more than 8,000 bullets at a witness on October 7th, but the case in the police department was closed. Adi Ohana, an employee of the electric company, wanted to return to his home but ran into a roadblock on the way. He feared it was an ambush by terrorists, made a U-turn, then was shot dead by 11 policemen, some of them masked. Okay, so the translation in the headline is a little screwed up, but basically, it should read 11 policemen shot more than 80 bullets at someone who was killed on October 7th. And, I guess there was a witness to that, but the police didn't investigate it. Continuing from this article, long hours after thousands of Hamas terrorists raided the settlements surrounding Gaza on October 7th, the electric company employee Adi Ohana managed to leave his workplace at the Rottenburg power plant near Ashkelon at 2100, that's 9 o'clock p.m. He was allowed to leave for his home in Moshav Mabakim. No idea about the pronunciation there. At one point, in a square in the industrial area of Ashkelon, he noticed a checkpoint and feared he would run into terrorists. He made a U-turn. Then 11 policemen at the checkpoint who suspected him of being a terrorist immediately shot him dead. Ynet learned that the prosecutor's office decided to close the case, stating that the circumstances do not justify prosecution. Okay, well, that's just one incident, but there are many others. Okay, somebody I follow on Twitter wrote this article on their Substack about October 7th, about the Hannibal Directive. What is the Hannibal Directive? The Hannibal Directive is a military procedure used by the Israeli occupation forces, IOF or IDF if you want to go by their official name, which I don't. Named after an ancient general who poisoned himself to prevent being captured alive, the Hannibal Directive allows Israeli forces to take any means necessary to stop Israelis from being captured alive, even at a cost of killing them. The directive was introduced in 1986 following abductions of IOF soldiers in Lebanon, which resulted in multiple prisoner exchanges. Okay, so this person asserts that Israeli forces killed hundreds of Israelis on October 7th. Let's see what this says.
If you're sitting in a car and a bomb goes off in your door so intensely that your door flies away, there's no way you're surviving.
Okay, so, all right, I don't know if you caught that. Over 1,000 cars were burned destruction caused at Israeli music festival by drone footage. Let's see, this came from, or this was, well, shared widely on YouTube. I don't know if it made it into mainstream coverage. And there's at the bottom, there's more pictures of the cars that were, in all likelihood, destroyed by Israeli helicopters. There were apparently 8 Israeli helicopters that flew to the site of Hamas et al.'s incursion into Israel pretty shortly after it happened. So even though a lot of Israel's communications infrastructure was destroyed and they had difficulty with command and control, they still were able to, contrary to what's been claimed, that it took them hours to fight back. There were 8 helicopters in the vicinity, firing upon basically everything within half an hour of when the security fence was breached by Hamas and other Palestinian fighters. Haaretz, Mako, which I haven't heard of, but I guess it's another Israeli news outlet, and Ynet all confirmed IOF helicopters shot targets at the music festival. Israeli security establishment, this is in Haaretz, Hamas likely didn't have advanced knowledge of Nova Festival because they moved it. They moved its location at the very last minute for somewhere in very southern Israel to, right outside of Gaza, like, a couple of days before October 7th. The growing assessment in Israel's security establishment is that Hamas, quote unquote, terrorists who committed the October 7th massacre didn't have advanced knowledge about the Nova Music Festival held next to Kibbutz Reim, which was, the kibbutz where a lot of soldiers from a military base, which I think is also called Reim, lived. According to police, 364 people were murdered at the festival. The assessment is based on terrorist interrogations and the police's investigation of the incident, among other things, which revealed that the terrorists intended to infiltrate Reim and other kibbutzim near the Gaza border because they're part of the security apparatus. According to a police source, the investigation also indicates that an IDF combat helicopter that arrived to the scene and fired at terrorists there apparently also hit some festival participants. Little weaseling there, claiming that they deliberately fired at the quote-unquote terrorists, but just accidentally happened to hit some people attending a music festival. I forgot, there were 8 helicopters in the on scene initially, and ultimately 28 were deployed to the area around Gaza, and they would shoot off their missiles and their machine guns till they were out of ammo, and then go back and fill up again and come back. So that they did this repeatedly. Okay, let's watch the rest of this clip. It's pretty short. Israeli pilots confessed. Israeli pilots confessed to the use of missiles on cars and admitted to shooting blind targets, which I guess they mean by that they shot at targets where they didn't know who exactly they were shooting at, whether it was Palestinians or Israelis. I find myself in a dilemma as to what to shoot at because there are so many, one said. I see a lot of cars on Route 232 standing and some with their doors open. I understand that I'm going to have a dilemma here as to who is our forces and who is the enemy, if any, and who are civilians. We see a lot of terrorists. We don't know if they are terrorists. Yeah, how can you identify a terrorist on site? A terrorist is somebody who deliberately attacks civilians in order to terrorize people, in order to intimidate them. According to Israelis, Palestinians are who have a weapon are terrorists by definition, but Israeli soldiers never.
כפי שהכוחות ותושבי הקיבוץ ראו אותה בזמן אמת. בשעה 4:20 אחר הצהריים, יותר מ9 שעות אחרי שחדרו לבארי מאות מחבלים, שכונות שלמות בקיבוץ עולות באש.
אני צופה עכשיו על בארי, על החלק הצפוני, אני רואה מוקד עשן בחלק הצפוני מערבי מול הבית עלמין, שם זה הקרקלים הצפופים?
התיעוד הזה חושף בפנינו את היקף הלחימה, ומספר המחבלים הבלתי נתפס שהשתלטו על הקיבוץ. הוא תיעד את הטנק שסייע לכוחות בבית של פסי, וירה פגזים לעבר הבית. והם הביאו פתאום טנק, אני אומרת לאחד החיילים, תגיד, אבל אם אתם רואים פגזים זה לא יפגע.
Okay, I'm not sure who's being quoted here. I think it's a military official. According to him, only on Monday night, 2 days after October 7th, there were still Hamas fighters in Kibbutz Be'eri, still holding Israelis captive and trying to escape back to Gaza with their captives. According to him, only on Monday night and only after the commanders in the field made difficult decisions, including shelling houses on their occupants in order to eliminate the terrorists without knowing whether the Israelis in those buildings were alive or dead. So, in other words, shelling houses without knowing if there were Israelis in them, but almost certainly realizing that there were probably Israelis in those houses. They lived there, or they were taking refuge there from wherever nearby they did live. The cost of the Hamas attack was terrible. At least 112 Be'eri residents were killed. Others were kidnapped. So, no mention that many of them were probably killed by that tank you just saw, or that was one tank out of many who were shooting at houses in Kibbutz Be'eri. Yeah. The IDF accidentally shot to death a resident of Nahal Oz. His family requests that he be recognized as a spaceman. I'm not sure what that's about. But Niv was mistakenly identified as a terrorist and was killed by the fire of our forces. His mother seeks justice. No one took responsibility. Karen Ayos Ohana, the mother of the late Niv Ohana, who was killed by fire from our forces due to mistaken identification, spoke with Anat Davidov, Yuri Segal, and Tal Levram, and shared, I had the best child possible, one of the best sons. No, he's dead. Adi was suspected of being a terrorist and shot dead. They demand explanations. Why didn't they shoot the wheels? That's the guy who was the employee of the electric company, and just shot 80 bullets rained down on him because they assumed he was a quote unquote terrorist. I would not be panning my camera around. I would be hiding. But the caption here says IOF used Israelis as human shields and fired from behind their cars. Just typical disgusting Israeli behavior. Okay, so there's a soldier right outside these civilians' car. Survivor Yasmin Parrott tells media Israeli forces killed everyone, including and that was in Kibbutz Be'eri. Israeli forces shot their own civilians, Kibbutz survivor says.
כולנו התחלנו לרוץ, כולל המחבלים, כולנו הסתתרנו, משכבים על הרצפה, ביריות, בום 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 בום, כדורים נכנסים לבית בכל דרך אפשרית. ופתאום מרגמה, לא יודעת, משהו כבד, לא עשה בום בכל הבית. אני שומעת את הילדים, הצילו, הצילו, בבקשה, הצילו. לא אשכח בחיים את הצעקות של הילדים. איך שהם זועקים לעזרה, ומתחים, שוב מתחים, מתחים, מתחים. כוחות הימ"מ יורים 2 טילי לאו לכיוון הבית. שוב מתחים, 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 וידי מנסה להרים את הראש, ואני אומרת, מורידה לו. ככה, מורידה לו את הראש, לא מדברים, אי אפשר לדבר, ואז פתאום עדי אומר לי, הדס, זאב כבר לא איתנו. אנחנו שוכבים על הצד, ואני מסתכלת דרך הכתף, אז אני אומרת לו, גם פסי לא איתנו. הטנק במקום יורה 2 פגזים, אחד לרצפה, השני לגג הבית. פתאום בום נוראי, ואני לא מצליחה להזיז את הרגליים, ואני רואה והידיים שלי שמוטות, אני לא מצליחה להזיז כבר לא מחבקת את דושי, ואני אומרת לו, דושי, אני חושבת שנפגעתי. ובשלב הזה אני אומרת לו עוד פעם שאני אוהבת אותו. היה לי ברור שיש פה טנק. זה היה ברור לי לגמרי. אל תשאלי אותי איך, אני לא יודעת. ואז היה הבום השני. אני מרגישה שנפגעתי. ואני מרגישה זורם עליי הרבה דם, ואני מסתכלת, מפנה את הראש כדי לראות מה קרה לי בדיוק. ואז אני רואה חור כזה בעורק הראשי של עדי. ואני לוקחת את האגודל שלי, זאת היד, לוקחת את האגודל שלי ועושה לו חוסם עורקים, כי מה אני עוד יכולה לעשות?
Okay, so she and I guess her kid, one of her kids were hit by fire from the Israelis. You can see lots and lots of bullet holes on the outside of that house they were showing you. That that was from machine gun fire. Obviously, Palestinians weren't shooting at themselves. But so that kid was killed. Lots of she was actually the only survivor. The other woman who they interviewed managed to escape from that house along with her Palestinian captor. So he brought her out basically to save his own life. And so they took him prisoner, and she survived. But she witnessed the Israeli tanks and others firing at that house, and they later learned that that woman that they were interviewing at the end was the only person who survived. Okay. Okay, here's testimonies from Israeli soldiers and civilians
where you stand exactly. We're lying, two couples, two men
talking about how
handcuffed.
the IDF
And
killed
inside
its
this-
own people
this,
on October
house
7th.
were Another 15 burned people, among them 8 babies. In this corner. They were
Well, not babies.
concentrated them,
There's only
and they killed them.
one baby and one toddler were killed.
Did you see?
I evacuated them.
But why is the destruction then? I'm sorry. Why is the
This
destruction?
destruction
It looks like more
was
like a.
because of our tanks attack.
Fight on them.
Yeah, because they were blocked in these houses, and we needed to conquer back the whole settlement, and
Okay.
it couldn't be happened without tanks.
Okay.
So how many were here, and then how many survived? How many did you?
No
were
one
you able-
survived from this house. From other buildings, we rescued many, but from this house, 19 people died, among them 8 children.
Okay, so 8 children. 19 people died at that house. That's a different house from the one that we saw footage of the tank firing on a moment ago. So more than one house, so probably several houses fired on by the IDF. And in this case, 19 people were killed, and you at least the 8 children, and probably the majority of the other 11 killed were Israelis, killed by Israeli occupation forces gunfire.
ואז אנחנו מזהים 2 טנדרים נוסעים. טויוטות. ועליהם מספר אנשים, רב, שעומדים בתוך הקבינה, ומערום של אנשים.
מערום של אנשים מאחורה, גופות.
לא יודע.
או אנשים חיים, אנחנו לא יודעים.
נכון. ואני מחליט לתקוף את הרכבים האלה.
זאת אומרת, אתה חושד שזאת חטיפה?
כן.
אתה מקבל ממנו את הפקודה לירות?
כן. ואנחנו יורים?
אנחנו יורים על הרכב הראשון, אנחנו יורים על הרכב השני. את הרכב הראשון דעתי פגענו, היה הבזק, המטרה היא כבר מאוד רחוקה, היא ב-2000 ומשהו, והרכב השני דעתי החטאנו.
אתה פוגע?
לא זיהינו שום דבר, זה היה קשית מצומצמת של... גם ראינו את הרכבים, הם באמת מעיד שנייה, זה... לא, אין לדעת.
ולמה אתה מחליט לתקוף את הטנדרים?
כי משהו בתחושת בטן שלי, הרגיש לי שהם יכולים להיות עליהם.
אז אולי בזה אתה הורג אותם. הם חיילים.
Okay, so he's talking about, he's not really sure who was in those trucks, but, he thought that some of them might be their own soldiers, but they're killing them anyway. There's a tank commander. You don't remember. And he decided that this was the right decision.
מעדיף לעצור את החטיפה.
That it's better to stop the kidnapping.
ובמבט אחורה, אתה חושב שעשית נכון.
So he's, acknowledging right there that they were engaging in the Hannibal Directive on that day, and there were apparently orders for them to do so. In hindsight, do you think you did the right thing?
נכון?
In hindsight, I feel like I did the right thing. This was the decision of that moment.
זה לא טוב לדון במה...
It's not good to think about what I could have done differently. What if
נשקעתי בזה בעבר,
I
וזה לא עשה לי
into it in the past and it didn't do me any good? I know that at that moment I did the best I could. Decided to kill my own people.
זאת הפקודה? או שזה אצלך בראש?
Is this the order or is it what is called a Hannibal order? The order itself, there are two gradual things you have to do. You need to fire at blockage points and control points. In case of a positive identification, you have to execute the order. Does it weigh on you today? Today I know that we didn't hurt them. How do you know that? There's certain things that I'd rather keep to myself for now. But it doesn't weigh on me because that image of people being taken by those murderers, holding them captive, and they're being tortured. It is a much harder thought as far as I'm concerned.
I attacked.
So he's assuming without evidence that the hostages were tortured. No evidence that they were. Lots of evidence that his own side tortures prisoners routinely. And he called them killers. When, he's the one killing his own people. He's the one killing them, not Hamas, him.
Machine gun fire, ensuring the destruction of everything around. And if we thought that 50 terrorists was supposedly the end, it was only the beginning. We understood that there are apparently hostages there, terrorists inside the kibbutz. I leave the platoon commander's tank there, and I tell her, no matter what comes from that route, you open fire. You have permission. If in doubt, of course check. But no matter what comes from the north to the south, you fire. And we broke into the place, took the momentum with the tank, broke the yellow gate. The hand of that soldier pointed and said, look, there's a shell there, there's terrorists there. I asked him, are there civilians there? He said, I don't know, fire a shell there. I decide not to shoot a shell there. We're talking about an Israeli community. I fired machine guns into the entrance of the house.
The tank fired, both machine guns and shells, even within the community. Basically a very complex fight. The terrorists did not fight the tank. They fought, and when the tank came, they either ran or they died.
The fighting continued there until around 8 in the evening, until we made sure the area was clean.
Okay, so that's 8 in the evening on Monday. I'm pretty sure that's what she means. So they were in that kibbutz for, Hamas was in that kibbutz for 2.5 days before Israel finally killed or captured them all and killed lots of their own people.
בשלב שהתחיל ירי של מסקרים וכטמ"מים על הגדר, כשראו את המסות שנכנסות ויוצאות.
נוהל חניבלה, אבל זה בכוונה. זאת אומרת, אם הופעל, אז הוא הופעל בכוונה, אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל
machine guns into the entrance.
Both machine guns and shells, even within the community. Basically, a very came, they either ran or they died.
The fighting continued there
נפגעו חטופים.
evening until we made sure the area was clean.
אנחנו לא יודעים אם נפגעו חטופים.
We don't know whether the
התחיל ירי של מסקרים וכטמ"מים על הגדר, כשראו את המס חטופים, בשלב שהתחיל ירי של מסקרים וכטמ"מים.
Okay, so they just started shooting in the direction of the fence between, separating Gaza from, quote unquote Israel, deliberately trying to prevent Hamas and other Palestinians from returning to Gaza with Israeli captives, who were roughly half soldiers and half civilians, by the way. Once they saw the mass traffic through the fence was coming in and out, the Hannibal directive was intentional. If it was deployed, an intentional act.
נוהל חניבל.
בכוונה, זאת אומרת, אם הופעל, אז הוא הופעל בכוונה, אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל כנראה הופעל באיזשהו שלב.
אם נפגעו חטופים במקרה, זה משהו אחר.
נוהל חניבל כנראה
because
הופעל באיזשהו
once
שלב,
you detect a
ברגע שהבינו שיש חטופים.
this is Hannibal. But the Hannibal we have been conducting drills for, okay, so they conduct military drills where they simulate murdering their own people to prevent them from being taken hostage, as well as the people trying to take them hostage. But the Hannibal we have been conducting drills for,
אז הם מיד אומרים, חבר'ה, זה חניבל.
over the past 20 years, relates to the case of a single vehicle containing hostages. You know which part of the fence it comes through, what side of the road it would move to, and even which road. What we saw here was a mass Hannibal. This is Colonel Nuff era's Israeli Air Force saying, it was a mass Hannibal. So many, many Israelis were killed by their own military. There were many openings in the fence. Thousands of people in many different vehicles, both with hostages and without hostages. It was an impossible mission to identify and to do what
זה היה משימה בלתי אפשרית לזהות
do
ולעשות
what
מה
the
שעשו. אני יודע
pilots did. I know that whoever had
שהיה לו
weapons
חימוש
systems
ביד,
available, both
כטמ"מים
drones and gunship pilots,
והמסקרים עשו
that's
כל מה
helicopter
שהם
gunship
יכלו,
pilots,
בלי
whatever they
שלנו
could
והמסקרים עשו
to coordinate
כל מה
or
שהם
without the
יכלו,
coordination
בלי
with ground
שליטה,
forces
בלי
because
תיאום.
these weren't around
ובמשך שעה
for an
דופקים
hour. This is someone else.
10 מחבלים דרך
Hunters banging
הממ"ד,
on the safe
צעקות
room.
בערבית.
Heard a lot of
זה
people in Arabic.
שעה מאוד מאוד מתוחה
Very, very tense hour.
והרגשנו בפחד שלא יתואר. ואחרי שעה הם מצליחים לפרוץ את
After an hour, they
הממ"ד
managed
והם
to
מוציאים
break into
אותנו, את
the room
ארבעתנו,
and they took 4 of us out
לבית
to a nearby
ליד
house where there were
שכבר
already
בו
8
שהו.
hostages. So this is Yasmin Porat, the woman who escaped from the house that I was talking about at the beginning of this, Israeli tank shells and machine gun fire killed all but one person there. And she escaped. And so she's talking about before that, when they were first taken hostage. So 4 of them, including her, were taken from one house to another house where there were already 8 hostages.
8 בני ערובה נוספים. אנחנו מצטרפים ל8 האלה ואנחנו הולכים להיות דרך כ12 בני ערובה עם 40 מחבלים ששומרים עלינו. אני מקצרת לך את הסיפור כי
הם מתעללים בכם?
הם לא מתעללים בנו, הם מתנהגים אלינו בצורה מאוד אנושית, זה אומר שהם שומרים עלינו. כן, מה זה אומר אנושית? שומרים עלינו, הם נותנים לנו לשתות פה ושם, כשהם רואים שאנחנו בלחץ, הם מרגיעים אותנו. הייתה תחושה מאוד מאוד מפחידה, אבל אף אחד לא התנהג אלינו באלימות. למזלי, לא קרה לי כמו שאני שומעת.
horrible,
נכון,
terrible things
אבל אחרי
happened.
שעתיים,
Right, but
בקיצור,
after 2.5
בהתחלה
hours
לא היה
in
שום
beginning,
גורם
nobody was
ביטחוני
from
איתנו,
the security
אנחנו
service.
אלה שהתקשרנו
We
למשטרה
were the
יחד עם
ones that called the
החוטפים, כי
police
החוטפים
together with
רצו שהמשטרה
kidnappers.
תגיע, כי המטרה שלהם הייתה לחטוף
The goal of
אותנו
the kidnappers was
לסיומה
to abduct us
במהלכה,
to Gaza.
אחד המחבלים
One of the
החליט
terrorists
להיכנע, זה
wanted to
מחבל שיצר
surrender
איתי
to the
קשר
police.
במהלך
This
השעתיים האלה,
terrorist was
יצרתי
the one
קשר
I
עם כמה
conversed with during
מהחוטפים,
those 2
אלה
hours. I
ששמרו על
talked to
הבני
one of the
הערובה,
terrorists who had kept
והוא
us
מחליט
hostages,
להשתמש
and
בי
he
כמגן
then decided to
אנושי.
use me as a human shield. So that's like the only case I've ever seen of a Palestinian using an Israeli as a human shield. So, I was telling you about this earlier. He, escaped from the house with her, with his hands up and no weapon, to try and spare his own life.
הוא מחליט להיכנע, אני לא מודעת לזה באותם רגעים, זה בדיעבד. הוא מתחיל להתפשט, הוא קורא לי ומתחיל לצאת איתי מהבית תחת אש, אני צועקת בזמן הזה לימ"מ, שהם יכולים לשמוע אותי, שיפסיקו לראות ואז הם שומעים אותי והם מפסיקים לראות. אני רואה על הדשא בגינה של האנשים מהקיבוץ שיש 5 בני ערובה ששוכבים 6 על האדמה בחוץ, ממש כצאן טבח מול הירי של הימ"מ שלנו והמחבלים.
הטרוריסטים ירו בהם?
לא. הם נהרגו מהחילופי ירי, תבין שהיה חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים.
זה כוחותינו ירו בהם? שניסו לחסל את החוטפים, את
הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל הבני ערובה. כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד. הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל הבני ערובה. כי היה שם חילופי ירי.
לחסל את החוטפים, את
הם חיסלו את כולם, כולל הבני ערובה. כי היה שם חילופי ירי מאוד מאוד קשים. אני משוחררת בסביבות השעה 5:30, ב8:30 כנראה מסתיימת הלחימה, אחרי שהיה מטורפים, 2 פקזים של טנק שירו לתוך הבית, זה בית קיבוצי קטן, זה לא איזה זה לא מקום גדול, וברגע הזה כולם נהרגו, הדס דגה, וזהו,
איך כולם נהרגו?
מהחילופי אש.
מהחילופי אש, כלומר יכול להיות שגם זה מאש כוחותינו?
חד משמעית.
כן?
וככה אני מאמינה.
So, she's asked, so the hostages could have been killed by our own forces? Yes, they could have, she said. That's what I think. Okay, so just to kind of summarize all this, mainstream media in NATO countries thought you were stupid enough to believe that Hamas, the militia of an open-air concentration camp with nothing but light arms, caused this level of destruction on October 7th. So there you see it. All the burned out cars. Just endless numbers of them. Over 1,000 according to the earlier thing I showed. This farcical propaganda was used to manufacture consent in the US, UK, and EU countries to arm the Israeli war machine to unleash genocidal violence against the Palestinians of Gaza. Now, mainstream media, a year after independent media outlets reported it, have learned about the Hannibal Directive and only now report that Israeli helicopter gunships unloaded their bullets and rockets on anything that moved in a mass application of the directive to prevent Israelis being taken hostage by Hamas, who would then be used in hostage negotiations to free the thousands of Palestinian prisoners. They may report glimmers of the truth here and there about what really happened on October 7th, but the damage done by stenographers posing as journalists who uncritically parroted every outlandish and baseless claim made by the Israeli government can be seen in the ruins and rubble of Gaza. And not just journalists, of course, but people like Kamala Harris are repeating these lies about mass rape and so on and so forth, and attributing all of the people who died on October 7th the Israelis who died, attributing their deaths exclusively to Hamas and other Palestinians. And we know that that's just not true at all. Okay, well, that's all I wanted to say about that. There's been an awful lot happening lately, but I like to just try and cover one topic at a time and cover it pretty thoroughly. So I will be back, some other day this week to talk about some other stuff that's been happening, including developments with the election, the Green Party campaign, and so forth. And what's up with the current situation in Israel and Palestine and elsewhere. And the usual smear campaign still going against Jill Stein and Butch Ware. Butch Ware kind of put his foot in his mouth today. I'll talk about that later this week. And we'll talk about that notorious professor, business professor at Columbia, Shea Davidai, who has been barred from campus for his harassment of students. And, of course, he pitched a hissy fit about it. So anyway, all that and more, probably some tomorrow, but definitely sometime during the remainder of the week. So that's all for now. I hope you have a good evening, and I will talk to you again soon.